Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how the sewage dumping scandal is stepping up another level in order to compete with the collapsing schools and hospital scandal, the re-emerging COVID incompetence scandal. The BBC have been reporting that water companies were discharging untreated sewage hundreds of times last year without there being any rain even to act as an excuse. Even with the Tories' very low environmental standards since the Environment Act 2021, this practice is still illegal. So what are the government going to do about it? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So I reckon you could make a wheel of fortune of every government policy area, spin it, and whatever it lands on would have a dysfunction and scandal attached to it. We've said enough times, but literally nothing works in this country now. And when it comes to the dumping of untreated sewage, we're not even talking about something which is harmful, but which Conservative voters don't really care about. They do care about this. While Sunak chases after far too few votes in the red wall with his culture wars, something that's failing anyway, he's completely ignoring the party's more traditional target voter. There have been all sorts of excuses for the rapid rise in sewage dumping since we left the single market, because that's when it's occurred. Oh, it's the crumbling Victorian infrastructure, that privatisation was supposed to modernise that infrastructure. Also, did this infrastructure only start to crumble when we left the single market? Oh, yeah, but it's also the rain. The rain comes, you see, and it floods it all out. There's nothing we can do about it. We can't cope with the water levels when it rains, you see. And it's like, so did it not rain before we left the single market? I know dumping occurred and our water quality, suffered as well, even inside the single market. But we used to get stick over it from the European Court of Justice, didn't we? But not to this level. Has it suddenly started raining a lot more recently? I mean, for goodness sake, Britain is kind of famous for its rain. And now the BBC have said that Thames Water, Wessex Water and Southern Water dumped raw sewage hundreds of times last year when it was dry. Even the Tories haven't made this legal. Not just because there's absolutely no excuse for it, but because it's even more dangerous to do it then. Because if there's less water in the waterways, the concentration of sewage will be higher. Now, I am going to point out, if you're thinking, phew, at least that's not one of my water companies, or that these three companies, it's not limited to them. But more about that in a moment. It's also worth pointing out that the BBC, for their investigation, applied a very generous to the water company's definition of a dry day, much stricter than the Environment Agency's definition. So water companies can have absolutely no complaints at all. This was dumping when there was no possibility of rain influencing the system. The BBC also said that they even appeared to be so-called dry spilling on July the 19th last year, which was the hottest day on record. So not only no rain, but lots of people predictably taking a dip in rivers to cool off on a day when they were flooding the rivers with raw sewage. And when we talk about the behaviour of private companies like this, when the Tories are in government, we often use the term criminally negligent, don't we? And that's because if they were a normal business, it clearly would be. But this literally is criminally negligent, isn't it? Because it's not like they lobbied the Tories to make the practice lawful. They got a lot of leeway in the Environment Act, but not this much. It is actually illegal, and there's no excuse for it. And it's deliberate, so there really should be criminal charges. It's a deliberate attempt to avoid the cost of treating wastewater. The other interesting thing in the report is that, so there's 9 water companies in England, and they were all sent surveys asking for details on discharges. The reason the BBC have named these 3 water companies is because they were the ones who responded. And so the BBC then used the information to work this out. That suggests the problem will, of course, extend beyond these 3 companies because the other 6 companies just didn't respond to the survey. So it might well be all of them. In fact, it probably will be all of them. The report highlights these 3 because they are the only ones who submitted the information. What about the rest? I mean, I could argue that maybe the government shouldn't be allowing private companies of public services to complete their own data returns anyway. This is a pretty good argument for having external monitoring and inspections. But if they are going to be responsible for collecting their own data, then when the government asks for it, they should be demanding it. How can you just say, well, 2/3 of the companies didn't respond to our survey? Oh, well. The report says that their excuse for not providing the information was because they are already being investigated for illegal dumping by Ofwat, the regulator, as well as the Environment Agency. They say that if they provided the details, it could sway public opinion. I mean, yes, I agree with that. If more people knew that they were not only dumping untreated sewage unnecessarily, but even illegally, then yes, I think that would impact public opinion. What is not being explained to me is how this is a bad thing. I mean, we're not talking about releasing information which could be twisted by the media and cause the public to jump to the wrong conclusion because they're missing some nuance here. The information would show that they are endangering lives recklessly and illegally and charging them a high premium at the same time. That is the conclusion the public would draw, and it would be entirely accurate. A few days ago, ITV ran the latest report on someone falling ill to this 22-year-old woman who was swimming in the sea earlier this year, not recently, unaware that it was polluted with raw sewage. She became seriously ill. 5 months worth of serious illness before she was, in the clear. This is not an isolated case either. We're seeing regular media reports of people falling ill after swimming in or around Britain. There was the famous triathlon, a few months ago where competitors were ill. And that, you can't say that would be a situation where, they just didn't see the sign not to go in. That's an international event. They had, they were supposed to have tested. They would have known everything. They would have worked with the local council. There'd have been no arguments about that. And yet dozens of competitors fell ill. It's an incredibly serious public health issue, and one that affects everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're in a Tory area or not. So what are the government going to do about it? If asked, no doubt talk about, there's investigations, because that's what they do, isn't it? There's an investigation. We can't say anything when there's an investigation going on. But if people are falling ill, they need to legislate. Like, if a serious crime is committed and it makes it into the national news, it's never more than a few minutes before the Tories are talking about tougher sentences for such offenders. They've done it recently. They'll do it the next time. They do it every time. Every time a crime offends national sensibilities to the point where it's in the mainstream media, the Tories are straight on it. You need tougher sentences, you see. Well, why aren't they legislating for tougher punishments here then? Labour have said they will introduce automatic fines for all discharges and that water companies won't be allowed to pass on the cost of these fines to the customers. They said they'll also strike off any company directors who repeatedly breach the rules. Well, we've clearly got company directors repeatedly breaching the rules here. And Labour, remember, Labour are expecting to form a government. They're not just like carping from the side, this, like a Nigel Farage, this is what I would do if I was in power. They're actually expecting to be in power quite soon. So they've looked at the situation and they have decided it's absolutely feasible to clamp down on both legal and illegal raw sewage discharges. By doing nothing, the Conservatives are just making Labour's job easier again. The bottom line is, if a practice is illegal and water company executives are presiding over hundreds of cases of that illegal practice, they should be facing action because they're willfully breaking the law. This isn't like, they did it one time and it transpires it was a series of human errors and it's like, okay, well, let's make sure that can't happen again. No, this is all the time. And if it's happening hundreds of times on what the BBC are calling a dry day, it does rain here. So there's plenty of days when it's raining. So that might actually mean they're dumping on every day when it's dry. It means it's standard practice. And if the BBC have found the evidence of all of these water companies who submitted their data, then it suggests it's standard industry practice. Not just one or two rogue companies, all of them. Something that would absolutely be a massive national scandal if it weren't for the fact there are now so many massive national scandals in public life that it's hard to prioritise. Recall many years ago, Boris Johnson, he was just embarking on a political career. He was asked about, how you're going to cope with criticism. He jokes that his plan was to avoid it by committing so many gaffes that people wouldn't know where to focus. Oh, how people laughed. Oh, how witty Boris. Little did they know he was working on the manual for Conservative practice in government. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.